Hello, this is Brian Foster, and welcome to our program this Tuesday night, at least where I am. We come every Tuesday um, and Sunday for week after week. And I invite you, I put a link here for Facebook users if you'd like to comment. You have to have a special comment on YouTube. Of course, you can just put the comments in on the live stream. So again, we live stream every Sunday and Tuesdays at 5 o'clock Eastern Time, United States. Of course, all time zones around the world. So please make your schedules and join us on Sundays and Tuesdays. And tell your friends about our channel, Spiritism channel, NW Spiritism, our nwspiritism.com blog, where we have all sorts of resources about Spiritism, books, articles, free audio and free PDF books. So there's a lot of information you can read and learn about Spiritism. Spiritism was brought to you by Allan Kardec in the 1850s. He is called the codifier of Spiritism. What he did is he set up a 1,019 questions, and he gave those questions to multiple mediums in different locations. Each medium didn't know other mediums had the same questions, and he didn't use the answers from the spirits unless the answers were similar or exactly the same from different mediums. And from that, he exposed, he was the third revelation, which Jesus promised us as the consoler will come and tell you and give you more information. Well, that was the Spirit of Truth, and the Spirit of Truth organized spirits talking to the different mediums, and Allan Kardec codified those answers and created the Spirit's book. Allan Kardec also created other books, but I would say if you are interested in Spiritism, you should really start with the Spirit's book. It is wonderful, and you can get that book in PDF. Just put in Allan Kardec space PDF. You actually find all his books on PDF. So I just wanted to make sure everyone knew about that. So now let's get started with Gone West, Part 2, The Officer, the first message of light. So as we've talked before, the officer was this pretty smart fellow, very focused, and he always wanted to get his way. He was self-centered and prideful, and he will tell you that himself. And when he died, he went to the lower zone, which is the space around the earth. And then he did, he tried to do bad things, and he was sent lower. Then he was a general of a city and took over another part of a city. And then he said, oh, no, this is too boring. And he went back to earth and tried to take over people's lives. And then he was sent way down. And he was sent to this area where he would be part like into a herd. And these he described them as demon-like, spirits that would just whip him and make him run around. And then finally, he just went down even further. Well, and so these last couple Tuesdays, we've been talking about how he's come back up. So eventually he started to learn how to pray. He had some sort of intuition. It must have been from his spirit guide. He had intuition to pray and ask for love and forgiveness. And so he's still not sure about this, but he's trying to be better. And he says it is making him weaker. So then he goes back to where he was, about the level where he was before down in into the dark abyss, into what he calls hell. Of course, there is no hell. It's not for eternity. You're not in this place. You're not in this hell, this purgatory forever. Only as, like the officer, where you start asking for help and start changing your ways. So let's get started on what the officer has to say. So he went to a hospital, and of course, I talked about that last week. In the hospital, all they did is operate on people, kind of torture people. He went to a library, as he says, a library in hell, a hospital in hell, and the library was all like horrible books. And it was just all about, being mean to people and ways to torture. And the hospital, all they were doing is operating and torturing people. But he escaped from the hospital. Now I'll carry on. He goes, after my experience in the hospital, I was more than ever anxious to get out of that division, but for a long time could find no way in which to do so. I kept away as much as possible from the city of hate, or indeed all cities, for they all partook of the same nature. On one occasion, I blundered suddenly into what seemed like a corral. I don't know exactly what that is. It was a fairly large one. I soon discovered it was ruled over by the redoubtable Shaka. It must have been like a kind of a tribe area. Oh, Shaka might be Shaka, Zulu Shaka. So that's maybe what he is describing. He seemed to be living very much the same sort of life that he had lived on Earth. Of course, the officer probably was a contemporary of that because he was back in that late 19th century. One of his favorite amusements was to set his tribe to dig a huge pit, and when it was finished, he would surround them with his imps and order the latter to charge down upon them from all sides and hurl them into the pit. At other times, he would order an expedition against a neighboring kraal, for there were many such kraals around it, storm it, and drag off a large number of people as slaves. He had many pleasant little devices for amusing himself in a similar way to that which he had done on earth. In short, I found that even in hell, like attracts like, and and the natives still tended to act like natives and settle together, harking back to their old institutions. I had rather a rough time there, for I was of course soon spotted and dragged before Mshaka, who declared I must either be a missionary or a traitor. In either case, I was an enemy, so he ordered me to be flung into a bonfire, which was specially made for me. Of course, you are used to these material description and understand that it really means that their wills impose the idea of a bonfire on mine. So it's interesting. So already the officer is starting to understand that like attracts like, which is in Spiritism, we call that the law of affinity. And the law of affinity is very important to us. So let's talk about the law of affinity for a moment. So what happens with the law of affinity? It filters us and it sends us to where we belong. Now, what do I mean by that? So if we go through life, let's show this. I use this a lot. We go through life and our previous life is recorded, everything in detail, every thought. That determines our next life. And then we're in here in our present life. Of course, everything we do in this life is also recorded and analyzed to create our future life. Now, when you leave the incarnate life, you go to where there are others like you. So if you are, let's say, a pickpocket or like a criminal of some sort, you go with others like you. If you are really dangerous and love torturing people, then you go even lower into these depths of the dark abyss, as they call in Spiritism. Now, if you are a nice person, you maybe go to one of the levels of heaven, depending on your spiritual maturity. And so what happens is people who are nice gather together. People who are mean gather together. People who are miserly, looking for gold, gather together. All these things. And so, whereas karma is the process of tracking what we're doing, and incarnation is the second leg of that, is where it makes you come back to earth so you can train yourself, right, to improve your personality and your character, because reincarnation and karma put together to create ourselves a determined set of trials. We have the willpower to act the way we want. We'll have more freedom of action and less determined futures as we go into higher levels of planets. But right now on this level of planet, we're pretty locked in. Not completely. There are variables. Some spiritists will say everything is preordained. In my research, I have not seen that. I've seen exceptions. So then the third kind of leg of that solus is the law of affinity. Because what that does is after we go through our trials because of reincarnation, and karma tracks everything, and they go, okay, we've tracked everything. This is where you go, right? The law of affinity is automatically you go with kind of, where you belong in the spirit world. Now, of course, on the physical earth, that doesn't happen because everyone's all mixed up, right? We have good, bad, indifferent people, neutral, all together. Like it's like, it used to be our public school where you'd have all sorts of students here in the United States together. So, but in the spirit world, it is not true. You go where there are others like you. Now, the law of affinity. So what happens then is if you're others like you, and let's say a lot happens is your family is kind of on the same level for the most part. There are exceptions. I'll talk about those in a moment. So when you reincarnate, you tend to reincarnate in family groups. Now you can think about countless number of lives and go, well, how many mothers and how many fathers have I had, right? Brothers and sisters, like, you know, it can be amazing. Well, it doesn't usually work that way. Is you'll be the son or daughter of a mother and father in multiple lives. It may evolve to something different, depending on your level and what you want to learn. There could be exceptions to that. But I've read many areas where, time after time, in fact, my wife and I were told, my daughter, it's been our daughter before. So now, so that's why you see families that kind of seem the same. Although there's always, the old thing is called the black sheep, right? Well, that's because a lot of times families will volunteer to take a more primitive spirit to help him or her mature, and they will take this extra person as a child into their family and try to give them a leg up on their spiritual maturity. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. The parents do not have anything detracting against them if it doesn't work. If they tried, it's the free will of the child born into that family. So that is why. So even the officer saying, "Oh yeah, like attracts like." So he was put into the bonfire. He goes, "Well, I suffered rather badly, but not so badly as I should have done had I fallen into the hands of civilized man. For these savages, as a rule, don't understand how to visualize and impose such visualization on others as well as do the more civilized spirits. I managed to escape out of the fire, and though flung back again and again several times, at length succeeded in getting clear. This was due to the fact that news arrived that a neighboring chief was marching on the kraal at the head of quite a large army. Shaka was at once so busy organizing his forces that I slipped away almost unnoticed. But just before I got quite clear, I noticed a man rush at Shaka and I noticed a man rush at Shaka and try to stab him. It was, I learned, a brother of his, and amid the confusion, I bolted. So at another time, I found myself in Athens. I had always thought of it as a beautiful city of dazzling whiteness with splendid sculptures. It may be so in the realms of faith, but down here in hell, I think it was one of the most dreary places I'd ever seen. The very remnants of its beauty, still visible through the ruin, were the more pitiable. Its temples were broken and ruinous, with wrecked pediments and fallen columns, and filth and slime were everywhere. Its statues were mutilated, and worse, transformed from beautiful to the vile. Even what once must have been fine now appeared distorted. The faces seemed full of evil, repulsive, vicious, and hideous. It was as if the low vices and evil lives of the people who dwelled there and their bad motives was entered into the statues and transformed them from things of beauty to monuments of iniquity. So again, you'll see this in as heaven will, and the lower levels of heaven, and maybe the lower zone will reflect some of the cities, and they'll bring up an idealized form, the more beautiful form of what people did on earth. But in the lower zones, or as the officer says, in purgatory, hell, you'll see the quite opposite. You'll see the corrupted version. You'll see the less intellectual version, the more ignorant, cruel version. And so, but again, that's the type of people you have. Now, you do have people like the officer. They're intellectually, very with it. He's very smart, but his moral compass was pointing in the wrong direction. What he learned. But there's a lot of people who are still smart, but they're still mad. In fact, there was a story. It was in a book by Divaldo Franco. planetary transition. And one of the kind of rulers of a certain area of purgatory, the dark abyss, just hated the spirit, the Jesus Christ. And so he was down in that area because he just hated everything that Jesus stood for. And the reason he did that, he was a Jew back in Spain during the times of the Spanish Inquisition, and he was tortured quite severely by the Spanish Inquisition. And therefore, he just hated anything to do with Jesus Christ. And he sent, spirits to try to, hurt what the spirits are doing good for people. He was trying to stop the spiritual ascension of the earth. Anything he could do to stop that because of his thirst for revenge. Now, if this poor soul, God bless him, right? Because I'm sure he's a very smart person, and he went through a horrible torture. I mean, I can imagine him. I can see why he'd want that. But if he really understood how the universe works, he was tortured because he must have done the same or worse to others. So did he have a right to say, I hate you because of what you did to me? I mean, of course, he always has a right, I should say. But intellectually, he should have kind of stepped back and thought, oh, I went through that because I must have done something bad myself. That's karma, right? It all comes back to him. But he couldn't look that broad. Someday he will. At some time, he will grow up. There's another story of like one of these judges in hell who would judge people and send them and make them change shape, etc. And he was Pope Gregory. I don't know what number he was, Pope Gregory something. And the story about him is he actually, when he died, he went into heaven, and he wasn't treated like he should be, which is the right hand of God, of Jesus, right? Because he wasn't, at that time, he was an infallible pope. And then he said, no, I'm not going to stay here, because that was pride, right? Pride put him right down into hell. And of course, there's a great book called Liberation about what his mother did to get him to realize he was on the wrong path and get him out of that situation. A great book called Liberation by Francisco C. Xavier. I'll say a lot of times it's Chico Xavier, but if you look at Francisco C. Xavier, you'll find his books. You can actually go to my site, nwspiritism.com, click on the picture of Allan Kardec, and then it'll take you to a bookstore, and you'll see Allan Kardec's books, Chico's books, other books that you can buy. Of course, you can always find them on Amazon. I find them on Amazon too. So now the officer is in Athens. And so I'll carry on with what he said. He said, I got a bad reception there. A common informer at once raised a cry, a spy, seize him. And I was dragged into what seemed like a marketplace, and at once tried. It was, of course, a perfect mockery of a trial, as you will readily guess. I was convicted and condemned to drink hemlock. Of course, Athens. That's what Socrates, he had to drink hemlock. I did so because I had no alternative. Besides, I knew it was all a hollow sham. I could not die. The effect was peculiar. I grew stone cold at the feet, and gradually that coldness reached up until it touched the place where, had I still been a man, my heart would have been. I seemed to collapse on the floor, and at once the spectators cried, he's dead. So they picked me up and carried me out through the city gates, threw me down, and went away. Of course, I was not really dead, but for some time I was unable to do anything, so strong was the spell, as it were, that they had imposed upon me, to the effect that I was dead. However, before long they found something else to think about and forgot me. So let's cover a couple things. First, they killed him by hemlock. So they must have had this memory of that's how they killed other people in Athens. Of course, that's how they killed Socrates, right? And Socrates, I've written articles on Socrates. He was a precursor to introduce people to the concepts that Jesus would come, as far as when he came 400 years after Socrates. Of course, Socrates was killed. He was on trial. They put him on trial for corrupting the youth. And how did he corrupt the youth? Well, First of all, he would teach them to question authority, and of course, as Socrates, of course, with a Socratic dialogue where he would just ask questions. He wouldn't make comments. He would more ask questions and get people to reveal that they didn't really know what they were talking about, which he could do. He's wickedly smart. And then also the fact that Socrates preached that might does not make right. He preached something that was more like the golden rule. He says, look, if God doesn't want you to make sacrifices for him. He doesn't want a bunch of dead cows and pigeons. He wants you to become a better person. You don't need to do that. And you should treat everyone nice. Don't treat other people badly. Don't mistreat your slaves just because you have power over them. You're supposed to be here to treat everyone honorably. And of course, he also had a variation of the golden rule. So, of course, they didn't like that, and they had enough votes to convict him to death. Now, the other thing is, as the officer said, he drank hemlock, and he goes, now, of course, I couldn't, it wasn't really poison, but it was a spell. So when he was saying a spell, he's talking about the collective will of the crowd. And, of course, now remember, in the spirit world, thought is action. The collective will of the crowd was this guy should feel like he's drinking hemlock, and the officer wasn't strong enough to resist that. Oh, I'm feeling like I drank hemlock, and therefore I'm feeling like I'm starting to be paralyzed. So physically, he wasn't paralyzed because you can't die. You think you have internal organs. In fact, they can torture you and cut you open and take out your heart. There won't be any blood. And if they chop off your arm, you might faint for a while, but then you'll wake up whole again because you are a logical construct. And as part of your logical construct, you have your perispirit and you're you. And when you wake up and you think where you are again, you will be as you think you should look, unless there's a stronger dominant will making you look like something else. So then the officer said, at once I found myself becoming normal, rising up and hurried from the place. By now, I was about as sick of the division of hate as anyone could possibly be. So it's working, right? The spirit world said, okay, we're going to put you in this place where the law of affinity, where like are with like. And guess what? If you're like a ruthless, uncaring, selfless soul who wants power over everyone else, guess what? You're going to be with others like you. And do you like that? So anyway, he goes, and I determined to make an effort to get out. I therefore knelt down on the stony ground and prayed. My God, how I prayed. At length an answer came, and in an unexpected manner. I saw coming towards me a light, yes, a real light, not the horrible red glow which passes for fire down here and has all the unpleasant effects without the pleasant ones. No, this was a real light, silvery, clear, and pure, come down from the realms above. It drew nearer and nearer, and by degrees I perceived that the light came from a man, or was it an angel? Yes, I felt sure it must be an angel. I stretched forth my hands in longing prayer. But as he came nearer and nearer, I felt an intense pain. It was the light and seemed to be eating into my soul. At length I could bear it no longer and cried out in agony, stop, stop for the love of God, stop, it burns, it burns. Now, why did he feel bad? Why did he feel bad? So there's a good answer to this. And let me give you another example first. There's an example in the book, How You're Guided by Spirits, the third in my series about the spirit world. And when this kind of angel, right, this higher spirit started talking to a crowd, then they would started crying and yelling. They would drop to the floor. And he said they would drop to the floor because if this was down on the lower zone, this wasn't even down in the dark abyss or purgatory, as often calls it. They dropped to the floor because they felt, it all came back to them. They felt the harm that they've done to others. They felt the wrongs they had committed, and it just made them feel so terrible. But it burns because what the high spirit was saying, it's burning away those feelings, right? So you can come to a better place. And so that's why it is, once you're into this lower zone of this hell, it really is hard to go up, because you go through, it's not, you think it's physical pain, but it's really mental pain that translates itself to physical pain, because you're just feeling so like, oh my God, I can't believe I stole that, or I can't believe I murdered this person, or I can't believe whatever. I can't believe I betrayed that other person. It's just, your mind comes back, because everyone has this conscience, right? There's no one all evil or all good. We're told that many times. So that little piece of good comes out, and it starts giving pain to the rest of you when you're down there. Then the officer said, "Then came an answer like the notes of a silver trumpet. You have called for help, and I have come to give it. But all progress entails a price. And the price you must pay is the burning away of the filth which encumbers your soul." Now, there we have it. It says the same thing as you read in Spiritist literature. "If you remain here, you will suffer and keep on suffering till you do come. If you go with me, you will suffer only for a little while and will be progressing. And that means you will be going away from suffering, slowly perhaps, but surely." So here's the angel came down to him. Now he said he was an angel. He said he was bright. So why are higher spirits bright? Now, if the officer was on the same level as this spirit that came to talk to him, he would look absolutely normal. But when you hear people's NDEs, near-death experiences, they'll say, "I saw an angel, and like these wings, I could barely make out his face." Well, that's because the higher the spirit, the more they reflect the love of God. It's not like they illuminate themselves. It's more like they reflect the love of God. It comes and it reflects off of them, and therefore they look bright. And to their eyes, like someone like me on a lower plane, it's very bright, and that's why probably in the olden days people thought angels had wings, because it was so fuzzy. So then the officer said, I'll come. I sobbed. "I am inured to pain by now. Lead on, and I will follow as well as I am able. Oh God, help my stumbling steps." He said, "I'll come no nearer," he answered, "but follow me. A light shines in the darkness, and now as then the darkness comprehends you." He goes, "I'll not describe how he led me out of that division. It would take too long." So then he said, "I followed the messenger at a distance," right? Meaning that he couldn't, if you got too close to the light, kind of hurt him. "We climbed up and up over rugged mountain sides until reaching the crest of a line of naked, barren hills I found stretching before us, a kind of vast marsh. Across the marsh ran a broken path, which every now and then seemed to vanish, only to reappear again. All around was a thick fog, but the fog seemed lightest over the path. The messenger of hope led the way along this quaking path, and I followed at a certain distance because of the intensity of the light which came from him, which at the same time illuminated the path we were on. Suddenly, out of the darkness loomed a great figure, terrible and horrible. I knew him at once by instinct as the personification of hate. He barred our way and cried, "None who have entered these realms may ever depart. Return the way you came, or I'll throw you into the marsh." But my rescuer answered, "Out of the way. In this sign I conquer." And raising his hand, he held aloft a cross. And as he advanced, the great spirit of evil, who was no man, but a being similar to the personification of drink, who I had seen on the astral plane, shrank away, and at length, being driven off the path, hovered over the marsh. Now, symbols have power. So you have to think of the spirit world. Now, here we say a symbol, there's a cross. It's just a cross, right? But in the spirit world, a cross is an intellectual idea. And remember, in the spirit world, everything is constructed intellectually. And so for that symbol of the cross had real power. Just like there was a story where a spirit trying to get up into out of the lower zone into the levels of heaven, said some bad words to a spirit who was trying to help her. But of course, she had been so abused by other spirits down to where she used to be, that she said, get out of here, I curse you. And then she felt terrible because in her mind, she sent curses that way. It's like, here on earth where, you had, voodoo and all those things. But in the spirit world, it's like you don't really want to think bad because your thoughts go out and affect other people, right? Your thoughts are action in the spirit world. That's why we're on earth, to train ourselves to keep our thoughts good. That's why we're not allowed to go in higher levels of heaven, because the higher level you go, the more power you have, the more power your thought has to do all sorts of things. So therefore, the law of affinity keeps us where we're at. When we're immature, keeps us where they're immature, and we can't really do much harm. It's like, would you give a 12-year-old keys to your car? No, they're not mature enough. Same way they don't let us, when we're not mature, go higher and higher into heaven when we can't control our minds, because that is really everything. So again, that spirit, that angel, as the author said, no, get out of here. I have a cross. Out. Now, as I said before, any type of conflict between a spirit from heaven and a spirit anywhere in the lower zone or in purgatory is no contest. It's like a kindergartner going after an 18-year-old. I mean, there's just like, no, out. The will of the higher spirit is so much greater that they just are completely destroyed. In fact, there was this one scene where a group of spirits came onto a stage, because there was the leader of the city, kind of a warlord of a city, one of these cities in hell, was telling these people all about, you should have hate and revenge, and then the spirits let themselves be shown. They said, no, sorry, you're not going to tell these people this anymore. And the guy turned around and he started to take his sword. And then the spirit walked up to him and he touched the sword. And then the sword just like wilted away. And of course, they said, and then everybody laughed at him, right? Because at that level, everyone's kind of sarcastic and mean. And the spirit said, well, I didn't really mean to have everyone laugh at him. I wasn't thinking of that, but I just wanted to show, who had the power. And of course, then the guy said, oh, okay, do what you want. They said, well, you're not the warlord of the city anymore. We're having people from another hellish city come and take you away. So you're going to be a slave in another city, so you can see what you've done. And then the spirit said, well, how did you arrange to have soldiers from this even heaven, hellish city below this city he was running? How did you arrange for that to happen? And he goes, look, Jesus and God control everything. This everyone's going, and there's no such thing as devil and spiritism. These are all ignorant, and ignorant, not saying like not smart, but not understanding what they should be understanding. So everything's controlled. Now, they're there because of the law of affinity, where they need to be so they can learn how to advance. Someday, every one of them will come to the light. He goes, so if they're given orders, they'll kind of understand they have to follow that order. So it kind of shows you how much power really is over these things. And the reason we're on earth with all these spirits all around us, right? We have good, bad, and different. We have, all sorts of spirits. It's like being in the bad part of town, and everyone's looking at your mind and giving you the worst ideas, right? Remember when you were like 14 or 15 and your friends always had great ideas, so, and of course we're here, and why do we have to be here on earth and be subjugated to having, spirits, make us feel and make us act sometimes, of course it's our fault, doing stupid things like drinking more, taking drugs, right? Or robbing a store, like, oh, go ahead and rob that store. Because that is part of our training. We have to learn to filter bad ideas out. Now, when we go to the planet of regeneration, we won't have that anymore. There won't be ignorant spirits, immature spirits on the surface or even below the surface of the earth. They will be gone. That's why it's called planet regeneration. That's where we're starting towards now. But right now, we have to learn to ignore those type of things. That's part of our training. Hey, life on earth It's not easy. It's work, it's study, and it's learning how to handle very adverse conditions. And you're going to get a lot of stimuli that's going to try and make you say, analyze your primitive emotions and say, okay, no, I can't act this way. That's why we're here. So it just shows you the power of a greater spirit. So as soon as my rescuer had passed him, he dived forward towards me, dividing me from my newfound friend. In an agony of fear, I turned and fled, but my rescuer, seeing what happened, turned and sprang after me. At once the evil spirit fled away from him into the marsh, while the messenger of light seized me by the arm. The pain was intense, for he seemed to be a living fire, yet in reality he was but a man who had come down from the realm of belief to help and save those in hell. After a while, the pain grew less as the light burned away more and more of the evil in my nature. Meanwhile, we crossed the marsh unmolested and soon found ourselves in front of the gate of a city. He says, now, this is the angel explaining, this is the city of lust. It is part of the division of hell, devoted to the sins of the flesh. The greedy and the covetous, thieves, glutton, and immoral people come there. In this city, lust rules, and you must pass through it and resist the temptations to which you will be exposed. If you do not resist them, you'll have to remain in that division, at any rate for a time. But if you do resist them, you'll be able to pass through. But even so, you'll not climb into the next division unless you help someone else to escape also. But now I must leave you and return to my work of rescuing souls from the city of hate. So that's what we have for the officer tonight. And look, when he was in our previous Tuesdays, when he was in the bottomless of hell, he said, how can I be one of the masters of this hellish city? He goes, well, go up to a level and bring more people down. And of course, now he has a good spirit saying, before you can come up, you got to take someone with you. The logic is all there. And, as I'm describing the spirit world where it's thought is action and you're immortal, it all sounds so fantastic. But then this is where you studying Spiritism really helps you. You start looking at the rules of the game. You start looking at why things are as they are. And it's like, okay, it's starting to make sense that we are these fantastic creatures, that we are immortal spirits, and that as God creates spirits, they must be trained. And if you're going to train people who are going to have unique personalities, now, if God wanted to, he could make us all like worker ants, right? We could all be the same, just marching along and be, the concept of good and bad wouldn't be there because you just do what you do. But that's why evil's here, is because the spirits say evil really is ignorance. But what God wanted is free-willed good people. How do you create free-willed good spirits? You let them learn. And you let them learn life after life after life, thousands of life, maybe millions of life. Who knows what we go through? Until you learn to have such mental discipline, and you learn to follow your conscience, and you learn to recognize the set of divine laws. But since everybody learns differently in this really complex, matrix or algorithm or software system that we live in, with the data packed so densely, and we're here on Earth, we think it's real, it's not, and there's spirits all around us. How do you create brilliant, kind, benevolent, loving, fraternal, charitable spirits without them going through a learning experience that all is there to filter them continuously to be what they need to be in order to help God run the spirit universe? Because that's basically what we're for. Right now, we're students who go to heaven, and even the heaven we go around, which is around the earth, right? A lot of times I'll describe things in geometric shapes, right, and kind of a geography bent, and I do that for us to help understand. But there really is no up down. There's really no circle. It's all state, right? You die, you're a spirit. The law of affinity. Okay, you need to be put in this state. So you're in the state of you're in this level of hell. Now, we're only going to let you go in this level of hell. You can wander around. You can go down. You can't go up without help or without changing your state. You change your state by changing your character and personality. That's how it works. But I'll also keep using these descriptive terms because we all have to learn differently. It helps us. So that's why it is so interesting, the spirit world. I mean, it's like if you look at Star Wars or anything like that, with the Force and it's just, the true fantastic universe is the universe we live in, is the real universe, which is the spirit universe. The most fantastic science fiction fantasy novel you can ever read or discover is Spiritism, because it takes the fuzziness that was told to us by the prophets, Jesus, Buddha, Socrates, Confucius, Lao, Zoroaster, right? As they say, you need to be better, you need to improve yourself, levels of nirvana, right? And it's all about all of these people's, what's your central theme? It's about mental self-discipline and being in the golden rule, right? Doing unto others as you would have others do unto you. Why would, and of course, Jesus sent all these ministers to earth to try and put into our thick skulls, at least for me, I'm sure I've been a thick skull person, to understand that we are here to we're not here to get the biggest yacht or the nicest car. We're here to become mentally disciplined for the good. And if we start out as primitive young spirits, right, just like your 5-year-old, right, your 5-year-old is going to lie, cheat, and steal. And they're not going to tell you the truth if they think they get that extra piece of candy. Why would they? They don't know any better. And yet you go through years teaching them, you got to tell the truth, right? Try to share, right? And they start learning this. We're the same. And so this is why it's to me, it's just quite fascinating once I found out the truth. And that's why I've written all my books, right? I've written so far 14 books. I have books in audio. I also have the Spirits book in audio format. You go to my site, nwspiritism.com, you can listen to, download in like the audiobook format where you can just go to chapters you want. Also, I have on my YouTube channel, this one, you go to the playlist, the Spirits book, I am loading up chapter by chapter of the Spirits book. So I think it's over 20 hours. So you can listen to that on audio. And so and my other books, like this book here, Heaven and Below, which is a good introduction to what heaven is, heaven, the lower zone, and the dark abyss, or hell or purgatory, if that's what you want to call it. And then also I talk about Jesus Christ. So it gives you kind of idea of the environment of the spirit world. And then in my next book, I'm really talking about spirits themselves. What is the spirit? What are you? And you are so much more than you think. And it's not just that you're immortal. It's that as you learn more and you do more, you have more attributes. You have more power. You plug into the universal cloud. You can think in your mind, okay, what is so-and-so doing? What did they do at 4 o'clock, 01.001 microseconds on Tuesday? What were they doing? What were they thinking? And you can find that out. You can look forward. You can look backwards. You can create things. Think of NDEs. When people report near-death experiences, a lot of them report the fact that they've had previous life trials, right? Even Swedenborg talks about that, and they talk about Spiritism, of course. They talk about you see your previous life. You experience your previous life. It's like you're there. And not only do the spirits expose what you're thinking, they expose what other people are thinking. How can they do that? Do they have to get a good film editor and clips the film together? No, they pull it from a database. They pull it from this universe cloud. This records everything, every thought you have that everybody's thought. Trillions of thoughts out there all the time. They pull that and then they show the scenes from that data. How else can so many people talk about these life reviews? Think about, this is what, think about how can that be? That can only be if you keep every piece of data anyone's ever thought of done and take it to that person. So this is why the more you think about this, now you can say, no, this is all, these NDEs are just people's imagination. Well, there's a lot of more studies on that, and people are seeing things that other people can't explain. People will have an NDE and they'll go, oh yeah, I was floating on the top of the hospital wall and I saw Dr. So-and-so say this to the nurse. And I go, how did he know that? So, but that's for everyone for themselves, right? What Spiritism doesn't say is you have to believe or you're going to rot in hell. No, no. We just keep putting that information out to you. So it's usually, if you come to Spiritism, you'll have some sort of inspiration or inclination for some reason. I had mine, to understand like there's more than this. And then you've also probably said, well, a lot of these religions, they're kind of tribalistic. They say bad things about people's sexual preference, whereas in the Spirits book, and this was even published in 1850, said, okay, what's marriage? Well, marriage is between two spirits. How do spirits come to earth? They come as a man or a woman. It's their choice. So these things, and of course in Spiritism, spirits say, look, yes, there are a lot of things in the Old and New Testament that you would feel that are discriminatory and not nice. He said, anything that's a message of love and charity and fraternity is eternal. Why these messages are in the Old and New Testament and other people's, other prophets' writings is because the spirits could only talk to the population of the earth at the level of technology and culture they were at the time. So think about that. If Jesus came and said, love everyone, no matter what, right? People would say, I'm not going to do that. No, you can't have that. That's ridiculous. And it wouldn't have worked. You can only talk to people at the level that they can comprehend. And that's why, when people say, the word of the Bible is forever. Well, the not but that doesn't mean that the spirit world isn't talking to us. This is what Spiritism does. Spiritism is dynamic. As we advance, more and more will be told to us. And it all started in 1850. There are books by Leon Denis in the late 1800s. Then in the 1900s is, Chico Xavier, the Reverend G. Val Owen, which I based a lot of my books on here, The Spirit and Spirit Universe. They are more and more into Waldo Franco now, who's still alive. More and more is being presented to us so we can see. And then, of course, my last book in this series, I have other books, you can see them for yourselves. But I think this 3 series for people who are interested. Well, how we are guided by spirits, how we are guided on earth, how are nations guided on earth, and what is the future of earth. So if anyone has any questions, I haven't seen any of the last couple ones. I had lots of questions, but this one, people are more silent. If you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, I will sign off for the night. And again, I want to remind everybody, please subscribe, hit the bell, hit the like buttons, and tell your friends. We're here every Sunday and Tuesday night, and I will talk more about next Tuesday, more about the officer. So I will sign off, and God bless.